All right. Good noon, everybody, and welcome back to God Was Here, our study of the books of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, so that we can see this particular side of Jesus. In the last few sessions, we were talking about some of the teachings of Jesus. Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they tend to have this cycle of here are some of the things that Jesus did, and then here are some of the things that Jesus taught. One of the goals of the class has been to try to really understand who Jesus was, especially since he is so commonly misrepresented. And because of that, I think we can probably learn more from what he taught rather than just what he did. That being said, there is still a lot that we can learn from what he did, and we're now going back into one of these sections of what he did. Certainly, this is where we see the more famous things that he did. So, we're going to be seeing a lot of his miracles. For this section, we're going to be mostly within the book of Mark. Mark is it's interesting to me how the fact that Mark is the shortest book, and yet often he can be the most detailed when it comes to these things, and I don't think it's really any different here. We're going to start off with Jesus calming a storm, and that's going to be found in Mark chapter 4, beginning in verse 35. The Bible reads as follows. On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was, and other boats were with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him, and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" And he awoke, and rebuked the wind, and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was great calm. He said to them, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great fear, and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" So, apparently, Jesus and the disciples are traveling across the Sea of Galilee. Now, if you ever look up the Sea of Galilee on a map, you might be surprised to see this story coming from there because really calling it a sea is a misnomer. There are several lakes in the world that are significantly larger than the Sea of Galilee. If you look at Lake Victoria in Kenya, for example, way bigger than the Sea of Galilee. Or if you look at the Great Lakes here on the North American continent, much, much bigger than the Sea of Galilee. But also, if you know anything, especially about those Great Lakes, you know that just because it is a lake technically does not mean it is not dangerous, right? If you know Gordon Lightfoot, then you know about how dangerous the Great Lakes can be. Superior, they said, never gives up the dead, right? There's a lot of dangerous things happening on the Great Lakes. Storms there can be just as dangerous as storms on the sea. And that is also true of the relatively small Sea of Galilee. It is still big enough that if you are caught out on that thing on a small ancient boat, which we've made a lot of advances in boats, some of which you don't really think about all that often. But if you're caught right out in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, a bad storm can absolutely kill you. I might encourage you some of these days to look up video of bad storms on the Sea of Galilee. They're on YouTube. You could probably just search "storm on the Sea of Galilee" and watch how big some of these waves get. And keep in mind that the boat they're on, it's not some luxury cruise liner, it's something relatively small. If Jesus was down below deck sleeping, as the Bible tells us he was, I imagine only a couple of people could have been there at a time. This was not a large ship, this was a smallish vessel. So, certainly, when the disciples saw all of these waves and all the danger that was there, they were right to fear for their lives. Many people have lost their lives on the Sea of Galilee. As far as we can tell, there are essentially two different occasions in which the disciples were caught out on the Sea of Galilee in a great storm. The other one is the famous incident in which Jesus is walking on water. This is not that incident. This is a different incident when they are going across the sea and they're caught out in this storm. The disciples are naturally afraid of the sea. They're afraid of dying. I'm not sure exactly why the reaction to this was, "Quick, wake up Jesus." I suppose they did know on some level he was their best bet. I don't know if they thought he was going to do what he did, but they thought he could do something, so they wake him up with a little bit of an insulting question. The King James famously renders it, "Carest thou not that we perish?" Don't you care we're all dying here? Wake up and panic with us, seems to be the idea along with it. Again, maybe I'm being too harsh towards the disciples here, though. Maybe they know that Jesus is capable of actually doing something about this. The Bible says that he wakes up, he goes up to the deck, and he rebukes the winds and the waves. I really wish I knew explicitly what he said to the winds and the waves. Can't you see I'm trying to sleep here? Do you have any idea what time it is? Who knows what he said to rebuke the winds and the waves, but it's almost a comical idea. You don't rebuke the winds and the waves. You rebuke people. You maybe rebuke animals. Go on, get. That might be something he said to it. Who knows? Whatever he did, though, at the mere rebuke of Christ, the winds and the waves are calmed. The rebuke is not just for the winds and the waves, by the way. He also rebukes his disciples. Do you still have such little faith that you don't think you're safe in the midst of these storms? And then, after the whole thing is done, and the disciples are again on these calm waters, they say to themselves, "Who is this that even the winds and the waves obey him?" I should point out, by the way, that at this point they really ought to know who this is. They would have known about what John the Baptist had said about them, right? We saw that Andrew was probably there when it happened. And if not, certainly John would have mentioned, by the way, this is the one I keep telling you about. I don't know if John ever outright explicitly says, "I am the forerunner of the Christ," but you have to be living under a rock if you don't get that's what he's saying. When he says, "Behold, the Lamb of God who comes to take away the sin of the world," that might not be out explicitly saying this is the Christ, but come on, people. It's pretty obvious what he's saying. And yet the disciples say amongst themselves, "Who is this that even the winds and the waves obey him?" Well, the answer, of course, is the Son of God. But it's all pushing towards that particular idea. And Jesus is proving who he is through this. I also think that he's probably trying to send a message to the disciples. I don't think it was a coincidence that they just so happened to get caught up in a storm while this happened. I think God planned it to be that way. A lot of times, big things happen in the Bible to teach us things about ourselves. God is not saying here that no Christian is ever going to perish in a storm. Christians have perished in storms. But he's teaching us that even during the difficult times, remain faithful. And remember that God will give you what you need. A Christian with a proper attitude, if he's caught up in an actual storm, is going to say, if this is the time that God has decided that it's for me to go, praise be to God. Now I go on to my reward. This is especially important, not for physical storms, but when those storms in life show up. Think about those first century Christians who had to go through persecution and martyrdom, facing down death at the hands of the Jews or death at the hands of the Romans. I wonder how many of them thought about the disciples in the storm. I wonder how many thought, does the Lord not care that I'm going to perish? But then remembered what Jesus said when he was asked that exact question. Do you not care that we're perishing? And it's a rebuke. Oh, you of little faith. I certainly hope and pray that none of you ever have to perish for your faith. But if you ever think about that, and if you're in a dangerous situation at all, and you're tempted to start thinking, does the Lord not care that I'm dying? Remember that he absolutely does. But remember also your faith. The truth is, you should care less than anybody. I understand that's harder. That's easy to say and hard to apply. I understand that. But something to strive for. Okay. Let's move on with another miracle that Jesus does. We're going to still stay in Mark's account, and really we're actually going to be getting into two separate miracles that are kind of mashed together in Mark's account. This is now down in Mark chapter 5, and we're going to start off with verse 21. And when Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, keep in mind, he's crossing from one to another. This is one of these places, by the way, I should mention, there's a good chance my order might be off. Again, I've done my own harmonization of this. I haven't necessarily finalized it yet, so there could be some serious corrections that need to be made. This is going to take me a while. This is a pretty big project. But we should mention that before we saw in our last section of miracles and things that Jesus did, we saw him going over to Gennesaret and healing the man with the demon. That was a legion demon from before. In Mark's account, he has this happening after the storm is calmed, or at least it looks like that, and that's why they were crossing the Sea of Galilee in the first place, was to get over to Gennesaret. And now the first section of Mark 5, it talks about that, and now he comes back over to the Galilee, or hold on a second. Yes, it appears to be the Galilee side of it. So, there might be an inaccuracy there, and I apologize. I'm doing my best. But after that, he comes back, and we are now into verse 21. And when Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him, and he was beside the sea. Then came one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and seeing him, he fell at his feet, and implored him earnestly, saying, My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, so that she may be well and alive. And he went with him, and a great crowd followed him and thronged about him. So, Jesus' popularity is at a very high point. It appears to be very soon after people realize that Jesus is back, people are all around him. And it's probably because of his miracle working. Typically, you'll see that Jesus is at his most popular when he's doing miracles. He's at his least popular when he's teaching things that are very difficult to swallow. And we'll see that. But he's very popular right now. He's done a lot of miracles and people remember it. It says that one of the rulers of the synagogues, by the way, the group that ruled the synagogues were the Pharisees. So it's likely that Jairus was a Pharisee. It's interesting to me that he has so much faith in Jesus. We have to keep in mind that while we might use certain terms to generalize the people around Jesus, Sadducees, Pharisees, scribes, Romans, Jews, and even the Bible will make those generalizations, it's not meant to say that everybody under that particular group is necessarily a bad person. There were several good people who would probably have considered themselves Pharisees. You have Gamaliel, Pharisee. You have Nicodemus, Pharisee. And here you have Jairus, Pharisee. It's just that the general rule is that the Pharisees aren't particularly good people. And I'm sure you can find, I can't think of any examples off the top of my head of somebody who was a Sadducee, but was also a pretty good person. But I'm sure there were. Same with scribes. And we can think of several examples of Jews and Romans who were. If we see that phrase being applied widely, it is understood that there are exceptions to the rule. This is just being said generally. But you have Jairus, this Pharisee, who says, My little daughter is sick. A little bit later, we're going to find out it's a 12-year-old girl, and she is nearly at the point of death. And so he makes a request to Jesus, come over to my place and heal her. And Jesus is on his way to do so. It seems that he's a little bit blocked, however. Not an obstacle, rather, would be a better way to put it. There's an obstacle with the crowd around him. They're making it hard to move because they all want him to perform some miracle. He spends a lot of time with this. I expect a lot of them come from a very far way. I should also mention something. You have a constant crowd around Jesus. It's hard for me to imagine that when somebody is healed, by Jesus that they continued in the crowd for a very, very long time. In fact, there are certain points where even if you were healed by Jesus and you feel some sense of gratitude, and so you start following Jesus around, um, it's very hard for me to imagine it kept on forever. There's a couple of points where we know a lot of people left. When Jesus taught that I am the bread of life, a lot of people left. They couldn't understand his teachings. I highly suspect that included people who had been healed by Jesus, which is a very sad thing. I suspect there were a lot of people who were healed by Jesus who were in Jerusalem during the during Jesus' betrayal and trial. And I don't know how many people, and by the way, you really need to understand this. There were so many people that the Bible doesn't directly tell us about who were healed by Jesus by means of miracles. Look at the end of the book of John. He outright says, this does not contain all the miracles. He said if you contained all of the miracles that Jesus did, you couldn't, all the books in the world wouldn't be able to fit it. If you want to look at a picture of what Jesus' daily life looked like during these times of his extreme popularity, I think he probably spent most of his time just healing people. Probably a lot of time teaching, a lot of time praying, but I think he just spent a lot of time healing people. It's hard for me to imagine then that there was none who were healed by Christ, who weren't shouting, crucify him, crucify him. Maybe that's me being pessimistic. I hope I'm wrong, but it's hard to imagine that there wasn't one. Anyway, Jesus is on the way to heal the daughter of Jairus, and one of these people who are crowding around him is talked to us. She's not named, but we see in verse 25. And there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years, and who had suffered much under many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard the reports about Jesus, and came up behind him in the crowd, and touched his garment. For she said, if I touch even his garments, I will be made well. And immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. All right. You have a lot of people who are sick. I should also mention, by the way, that there's levels of malady for these people. Almost everybody has some level of malady, right? I am a healthy person, but there's a couple of things I wouldn't mind necessarily being miraculously healed of, right? I got bad eyesight. Without glasses, I'm nearly blind. I need these. I got duck feet, right? My feet go out like this, and I've tried several times to try to force myself to get my feet more in line, and it doesn't feel right. It's hard for me to do that. I'd like to stand up a little bit straighter. I have a bunion. I don't like any of those things about myself. Some of them probably could be corrected surgically, but I don't necessarily want to go through all of that. But hey, sure, I'll take somebody just touching me and fixing me up. I imagine there were a lot of people like this. This woman is kind of among them. I'm not saying that this is nothing. She has some issue of blood where there's a continual discharge of blood. Obviously, it's more of a malady than I'm describing with myself, because I'm living with the glasses, and a little my toe hurts sometimes because of the bunion, but I'm living with it. I'm fine. But she had spent all of her money on this. She was poor and destitute. Sometimes people act like becoming poor because of poor health is a new phenomenon. It's not. It's been that way from all time. It's a sad and tragic thing, and we ought to be generous. We have to, those of us who are healthy, the things I'm describing, they're nothing. Those of us who are healthy, we should probably be looking to those who have had to spend a lot of money, who are unhealthy, and try to be generous with them. Try to treat them the way you would want to be treated if you were in that situation. Try to remember that being unhealthy is more than just losing your health, but a lot of times that means losing all your money. It'd be good to remember that. And she's one of these people. She's lost all of her money because of this. The Bible just tells us it is an issue of blood. You might be tempted to read from Mark's account that she had spent all of her money on crooked physicians, people who are just taking their money and not really doing anything to help. Luke's account makes it pretty clear they did everything they could. So I'm not blaming the physicians in this case. I also don't think Luke is just trying to stick up for them because he's a fellow physician at all. It's just that, sometimes that happens. We've done all we could. But the issue was big. Now, what was the nature of this discharge of blood? The commentators that I've read seem to indicate it was probably uterine in nature. The woman essentially has something wrong with her body, and instead of having a once a month period, it seems to be all of the time. That would be tough. So she thinks about Jesus. If I can just touch, he doesn't even have to look at me, he doesn't have to acknowledge me. If I could just touch the hem of his garment, then I'll be healed of this. Where did she get that idea? Well, she probably got that idea from a sect of Jewish mystics which were around at this time. And that group put a lot of emphasis on objects of worship. And one of those objects of worship would often be the hem of the garments of the priests. You see, the garments of the priests, they did have special tassels and things of the nature. And some of these people believed that there was special power in the robes of the priest. And so Jesus wouldn't have been walking around in priestly robes, but just normal fringes and tassels to what his would have been acceptable in the culture. And the woman believed, I bet you if I touch that, I'll be all right. And she does. So let's go on. Verse 27, she had heard the reports about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, if I touch even his garments, I will be made well. And immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. And Jesus, perceiving in himself the power had gone out from him, immediately turned about in the crowd and said, who touched my garments? So, she was right. She goes and she touches the hem of Jesus' garments and is made well. And Jesus felt it happen. That, to me, opens up so many more questions. I don't think the power of Jesus was like a video game. If you ever play, I've always said there's two kinds of nerds. There's nerds who like, laser rifles and spaceships, and then there's the ones who like swords and dragons. I've always been more of the swords and dragons kind of nerd, and because of that, I play a lot of video games that have that kind of stuff, and they have like little magic systems in that. Well, usually in games like that, when you're playing, when you're casting magic, you can't keep doing it forever. There's a little bar, it's usually blue, and as you keep casting stuff, it goes down and down and down because you can only do so much. You have to consider how much you're using of it. Well, I don't think that's how it was for Jesus. I don't think he had the little blue manna bar that went down. It's like, hey, somebody touched me. I don't think that's how it worked. I don't think there was a limited supply of miracles that Jesus had, is what I'm trying to say. I don't even think it necessarily took anything out of him physically. I think when it says he felt the power go out of him, it's just saying that he was aware something had happened. And sure enough, it did. He said, who touched me? As he turns around. Now let's look at what the response is. And his disciples said to him, you see the crowd pressing around you, and yet you say, who touched me? So his disciples say, there's a whole crowd around you. Dozens of people touched you in the last 20 seconds. What do you mean, who touched me? But Jesus knew what he meant. And he looked around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembled and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. So you can almost imagine a hush falling over the crowd. I don't know what Jesus' reaction was like, but his demeanor must have at the very least been serious, perhaps even angry looking. He says, who touched me? And the crowd goes silent. The woman is an honest woman. She knows what he's talking about. She goes before him, falls before him and said, I touched you. The Bible tells us that she told him everything, the whole truth. So she would have told him, I thought that if I touched the hem of your garment, perhaps I would be healed. Let's see what Jesus' reaction is. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." I don't think Jesus was absolutely approving of everything that happens here. I don't know if the woman did anything deceptive, but I do think she probably had a couple of weird ideas. But the essence of what she does, I think, is what is important here. The essence of it is this: I am going to go to Jesus to find my healing because I know that's where I can be healed. I don't know how it's going to happen. I'm going to try what I can, but I know the healing comes from Christ. And Jesus smiles. This might be part of the reason we think of Jesus as so happy, gentle, and merciful during his time. Jesus says, "Go, your faith has made you well." Jesus, again, is using a miracle to teach us something. Our faith makes us well. Might not be physically. I think a lot of people came to Jesus for physical healing and never received it. Might not always be physical. But our faith makes us well as well. I'm not indicating that our faith is actually the power of our salvation, just in the same way that this woman's faith was not the actual power of the salvation. The power went out from Jesus, but it went out from him because of the woman's faith. That's true for us as well. Our faith is what causes us to act in such a way to receive that power of salvation. We might not get physical healing from Jesus, but we can get spiritual healing. And our faith can make us well. Is it truly coming from the power of our faith? No, no more than that truly came from the power of her faith. But our faith can make us well in that sense, spiritually as well. I think this incident has caused a lot of misunderstanding about the nature of miracles. There are a lot of people today who claim to work miracles. And I got to tell you, I don't believe in one of them. And the reason I don't believe in one of them is because I haven't actually seen anything miraculous. I've compared the miracles that they do compared to the miracles that we see in the Bible, and I find them wanting. Oh, sure, they'll have people who are sick and all of a sudden they're healed. I've seen video of somebody who was paralyzed, and then some charismatic preacher yelled something and said, "By the Holy Spirit, be healed," or "in the name of Jesus, be healed." And for some reason, they always hit him in the head. I don't know why they do that. I've never seen that in the Bible, but I guess that's how the Holy Spirit works nowadays. And suddenly, this guy can move, but there's always something a little bit wrong. If you see somebody who isn't able to move at all, and suddenly they can move, I don't see any proof that they weren't just faking it. When you look in the miracles of the Bible, you can see a lot of proof that people weren't faking it. It talks about these people being known in the community. I've known people who are paralyzed, yet I've never known someone who was paralyzed who then later was healed. I have known people who were blind, but I've never known somebody who was blind and then was later healed. I've not even known any of these people that you see being healed to have many witnesses about the fact that they were born or had been this way for a very long time. And yet you see that over and over again in the miracles of the Bible. And then sometimes you see somebody, and I guess there's legitimate reason to think that this person is actually sick. But then when they are healed, they go from having maybe a cane and they're limping up, and then they get hit in the head for some reason, and now they're moving a little bit better, but they're not really healed. That's not what I see in the Bible. When somebody's healed in the Bible, they're actually better. And the worst one you see is when somebody who is legitimately sick goes up to be healed, and they get hit in the head, and there's nothing different at all. And they always get told the same thing: you didn't have enough faith. Sometimes there are people in the Bible who Jesus tells, your faith has made you well. But they didn't have to be faithful. You have examples of the Bible being healed, of people being healed, and miracles have something to do with them, and they seem to have no faith at all. The man who was crippled, sitting in front of the gate, when Peter and John healed him, he didn't have any faith in Christ, it would appear. He didn't even know who Peter and John were. And when they got his attention, he expected to receive alms, not a miracle. We're going to see an example here in just a bit of somebody who obviously didn't have any faith and yet was made well. If you've ever been told that God hasn't made you well because you don't have enough faith, I'm here to tell you that you were lied to. That's not how it works. Jesus heals this woman. It was ultimately Jesus. That's where the healing came from. But the woman shows a lot of faith, and she goes away happy because of it. Now, when we got into the beginning of this section, we were introduced to the man Jairus, who has a very sick daughter. We were interrupted by the woman with the issue of blood. But now let's continue. Verse 35. While he was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house, that ruler is Jairus, someone who said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" So, as they're on their way to the house, the daughter, we know, is very sick, on the edge of death. And as this particular incident is going on, somebody comes over to Jairus and says, "Your daughter is dead. Don't bother Jesus. It's too late." And then, but overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." And he allowed no one to follow him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. They came to the house, and the ruler of the synagogue and Jews saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing. And Jesus saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. So they go up. Jesus says, "You take me to your house anyway." But he says to the crowd, "You leave me alone." He even says to most of his disciples, "You leave me alone." He only takes Peter, James, and John. Those three really made up the inner circle of Jesus' disciples. You could probably describe those three as Jesus' best friends on earth. But he only takes Peter, James, and John, and they go to the house. And when he goes there, you can hear all the wailing and the crying. You can imagine. You imagine that girl's mother wailing and crying. You know, I don't know if I've ever had to hear the anguished wailing of a mother who has lost their child. I've met, of course, parents who have lost their children, but I don't know if I've ever had to hear them wail over it, but I hope I never do. I can't imagine what a terrible sound that would be. And he hears that, and verse 39, and when he had entered in, he said to them, "Why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. Now, I just mentioned that the mother was probably wailing and weeping. You wonder, why is this rebuking going on? This is actually probably more than just the mother. In this culture, and in many other cultures, by the way, it seems strange to us, but I've always felt that one of the things that really tells you a lot about any given culture is how they deal with death, because almost everybody does something really weird when it comes to death, and it's a big division among cultures, and everybody thinks that their own culture doesn't do anything weird. I guarantee you they do. Let me ask you this, Americans. Does it not seem a little strange to you that when we go to viewings before funerals, most of the people in the room are kind of acting like there's not a dead body on the other side? We talk, I mean, there's you can tell there's something a little different. We tend to keep our voices low, but people are telling jokes. They're laughing, they're talking about mundane things, they're making small talk as if there isn't a dead loved one on the other side of the room. I think that's strange. I participated in it. It's my culture. But I gotta tell you, I think it's strange. Of course, comedians could tell you all sorts of weird things about it. You know, I heard a comedian once say, why on earth do we give pillows to the dead? and it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. They don't need comfort, but we always want them to be in comfortable looking caskets for whatever reason. People are weird about death, and I think it's very telling of a culture when you see how they deal with death. Most cultures are not like our own, where we kind of just act like it's not happening. And if we cry, we try to cry quietly and try not to bring attention to ourselves over it. In other cultures, and there's still some today that still have this particular practice, it is considered a sign of respect to have weeping and crying around it or around the dead person. So much so that people would be paid to mourn over the dead. I once found this video on YouTube, which I always thought was absolutely fascinating. There was an island, and I cannot remember. An island in the Mediterranean Sea, falling under what we typically think to be European. Maybe it was Crete, but I'm not 100% sure. But this practice was still being done. It was older video, maybe the 80s or 90s or so, but people who were professional mourners, they go to recently dead people, they get paid some money, and then they wail loudly. And that's probably what's going on over here. You have some professional mourners who are wailing over the death of Jairus' daughter, which is why they turn on a dime so quickly. And when Jesus says the girl is not dead but sleeping, they start laughing at him. That's probably why. But we'll see who has the last laugh here. Verse 40, and they laughed at him, but he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went to where the child was. So Jesus puts all the mourners out. Now you only have 5 people in the room with the body of Jairus' daughter. 6 people. Jesus, James, John, Peter, Jairus, and Jairus' wife. 6 people. And verse 41, taking her by the hand, he said, Talitha cumi, which means, little girl, I say to you, arise. And immediately the girl got up and began walking, for she was 12 years of age, and they were immediately overcome with amazement. And he strictly charged them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat. Okay. Jesus sees the dead body of the little girl, takes her by the hand, and says, Talitha cumi, which I believe is Hebrew, meaning little girl arise. And she does. And not only does she stop being dead, she's not even sick anymore. She gets up and she starts walking and talking. This is the first time we see Jesus raising somebody from the dead. It won't be the last. It's also not the first time it happened in history, but it's been very, very rare. I can only imagine the emotional roller coaster that Jairus and his wife are on when they saw that their little girl was dead and now she is back. I don't know what it'd be like to be raised from the dead, but that's what happens here. She starts walking as if nothing had happened. You know, I've never read the book, but I've seen the movie called Pet Sematary by Stephen King. And the whole idea with that is that there's a place where you can resurrect animals or people. But you remember that great line. I like the old movie, and one of the things with the older movies and the Stephen King stuff is they always make sure people have Maine accents when they're in Maine. And you have that one guy, I can't remember his name, he's in a couple of movies, but he's got that great line. Sometimes dead is better. Oh, that always sends chills down my spine when I hear that, because the whole point of it was that they resurrect a cat, but the cat's not, it was a nice friendly cat before it died, and then when it comes back, spoiler alert by the way, when the cat comes back suddenly, there's something wrong with it. It should never have been you should never have messed with the natural order, and now you have this evil about the cat. It's attacking people now. And then the big climax is when the guy takes this to his daughter to the same place to resurrect her, and it's not right. She's worse than she ever was. It's almost as if a demon is possessing her. That's not what you see here. You don't see fakery. You don't see something being made worse. It's as if it never happened. And the relief that must have been felt at that time, it must have been incredible. And so now Jesus has raised someone from the dead. Now, it's interesting that he charges all the witnesses, don't you tell people what happened here. He wasn't lying when he said that the girl is not dead but asleep. She really was dead, but he meant sleep as in this is a temporary death. You know, we often see the same thing coming from the apostles later in the New Testament. Now concerning those who have fallen asleep, says Paul in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 or 4, I can't remember off the top of my head. Now he's talking about those who have died, but it means that this is temporary. And Jesus meant the same thing. But at the same time, this does give a little bit of an out. And it gives people a way to say, oh, she wasn't quite dead, as it turns out. She was just very sick. And why does Jesus strictly charge them not to tell anybody about this? Because he's already got way too much attention for the miracles. People aren't paying attention to the teachings. They're paying attention to the miracles. And people are doing foolish things already. And we're going to continue to see that. But there we have 3 miracles of Jesus. He calms the storm on the Sea of Galilee. He heals the woman with the issue of blood, and then he heals the daughter of Jairus. Next week, we're going to be talking about more of the stuff that Jesus did in this period, and I look forward very much to getting to speak with you about that. Until then, I'm really looking forward to seeing you again. I love you all, and I hope you have a wonderful week.